digital transformation requires people, process, and technology. Can you speak to maybe each one of these components? We've kind of touched briefly in kind of summary in some certain areas, but specifically about digital transformation, let's talk about people and your thoughts there, process and your thoughts there, technology and your thoughts there.
Yeah, what I may do is cover that maybe in reverse from easiest to hardest. I honestly think the technology is the easiest. And I say that because it's fairly easy to identify some requirements, a design, find an implementation partner. We're a fast follower, so typically when we implement some technology, it's relatively proven, so it's stable. Honestly, I think selecting the technology and making it work as long as you have the right partnership and skills is important, but it's probably the easiest part. I think the next tier of difficulty is process, in the sense that you have to define a new process. The tendency is to kind of recreate the old processes with new technology. Mm-hmm. Okay. And what you don't want to do is just reinvent the old world and spend a lot of the money, essentially redoing the same old way in a new technology.
Right. For minimal return on investment, right?
Exactly. I think that the process, you can define what the process should be. I think it can be difficult to implement, mainly because you've got sometimes departments that are maybe resistant to change. Sometimes they cross departments, and to get that alignment right. So I think process it must be done. You'll never get your benefits without modifying process. Mm-hmm. But totally I think it's the middle tier of difficulty. Honestly, I think the people is the most difficult, in the sense that you're dealing with individual personalities. Some people may feel threatened by change. I think even with the pace of change in the world, you would assume that everyone adapts to change quickly. But in reality, human nature, I think, kind of resists change. People like the way that they're doing things. And it's one of the things that keep trying to force the process back into the old way, because people will have a tendency to try to keep justifying why the old way worked okay. So I think the people, kind of retooling them with some new skills, getting them on board, again, transitioning their role is important, but you're dealing with a lot of personalities. So because you're dealing with so many personalities and skill sets, I think it tends to be the most complicated.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that we found in that people part, which I own this. I'm one of the owners of this business, and we're growing quite rapidly thanks to some of the things we're talking about right here today in the organizations that need assistance. But the people part's the hard part. You're trying to build it out. You're trying to find the right people. You're trying to find the ones with the right skill sets. You're trying to have them match your culture. I mean, it's tough. And then even when you get them, there's so many different dynamics. And we found that, setting proper expectations and getting their buy-in sometimes also contributes toward greater success rather than resistance of the processes, new processes and new technology you might be putting in place. Would you echo that?
I would. And I think it's really important to explain the why. People, once you tell a story that people can comprehend, like, this is why we're doing this, because it's the benefit of a patient and patient care, or the sustainability of the organization from a cost standpoint, or, consumers are, the impact on consumers. And I think once you tell the story as to why, in a way that people can't really argue with, they tend to get on board, but you're still dealing with a lot of individual personalities and skill sets.
Yeah. It's great for building buy-in, right? When you tell them the why. So long as they can believe in why you're doing it, I think it's great for getting their buy-in. Regarding the technology, what technologies did you leverage? This should be maybe the easiest question I've asked.
Yeah.
What did you put in place? What did you start using that you weren't using before?
I'd say this last 18 months or so, we've had a lot of dramatic changes within our organization. If you start with the pandemic and again, just from an internal, becoming a virtual team, leveraging Teams on a larger scale, DocuSign, electronic collaboration, that type of thing has been an absolute necessity for us to work the way we're doing. When you look at the clinical side, when I say clinical, you're talking about the clinicians, whether it's nurses or physicians. We did implemented voice. Again, physicians spend a lot of time on the computer. So, when they do their notes, we're moving into not just recording notes, but getting into more transactional interaction with voice to try to make physicians more mobile and more efficient and faster. Physicians have what we call pajama time. Pajama time is after they finish a whole day in the office, they go home and spend hours on the computer catching up with their paperwork for the day. That's a big drain on a physician. So what we're trying to do is minimize that pajama time, if you will. So voice is one way to do that. We've implemented smart devices. We went from just mobile phones throughout the hospital to iPhones that have a lot of applications on them. So it makes the entire staff mobile. So they're getting their full address book of other team members that they can communicate on that mobile device. They have access to all the patient information on that mobile device. They can get all their alerts and alarms when there's an issue that they need to respond to from a patient standpoint. They get that on their phone. So turning them mobile has been significant. We implemented about 1,000 iPhones just a couple of months ago. Within our systems, we're doing things like putting more intelligence, like predictive models just for patients. How do you predict when a patient might be indicators of sepsis, for instance? So how do you identify that quickly and alert a team to go deal with that? So a lot more intelligence there. We have our oncology team that's moving into something we call precision medicine, which is looking at genetics as a predictor for cancer risks. And again, it's not just doing the lab test to tell that, it's how do you integrate that through the whole operation from, when a woman gets a mammogram to has to do a lab draw of a blood test to their primary care physician. And how do you orchestrate that so that patient is taken care of is the key. So a lot of things going on in the clinical space and a lot of change in the consumer space as well. Deploying a new mobile app. When I talk about mobile app, it's easy access, doing online scheduling, getting estimates of their bill, paying online, that type of thing. Doing our video visits, using Zoom as a back end to do video visits, so they can do that from their phone or iPad or their laptop. We've implemented chatbots to do some risk assessments. Again, for if you're looking at like oncology, you do some family history, that type of thing. We've implemented chatbots. We've implemented texting solutions that says, hey, these are integrated with this is just one example. So if someone's going through surgery, the status, instead of someone sitting in a waiting room when they have a family member or a friend in surgery, the system automatically texts them out the status of the patient, whether they've gone into surgery, they're in recovery, or whether you need to come see the physician or whatever. So that's all fully integrated. And that's what I talk about connectedness. Everything I'm talking about is basically taking a lot of data that we already have in our core systems and how do you make it accessible out to consumers and clinicians and staff?
Yeah. And then how do you integrate as much of that as you can, right? So you don't have all these different applications sitting in silos all over the place, right? But how do we get them to integrate so it's much more of a seamless experience for the customer, experience for your staff, as well as easier for the IT staff to manage, monitor, do the things that they need to do to keep it working properly?
Well, that is, that is, go ahead.
No, please.
I was going to say that is one of the keys there when you talk about how do you manage this. So you do have to have an architecture, even though we need to work with a lot of vendor partners, a lot of consultants, we still have to have an architecture. How do we plug these services in to where they not only work, but they're managed? But one of the keys as well is how do we, as we transform, how do we eliminate some of the old stuff? All these technologies can't be always additive. So we have to eliminate some of the old. The tendency is that we keep putting in another system, but we don't take anything out. So from a cost of IT starts skyrocketing, and the cost of support, the difficulty of support. So I think the transformation is not just the experience. When I talk about this connectedness, I think it's how do you architect so that it's efficient from a data store standpoint, an architecture for access, and we eliminate some of the I'll say the redundancies across the environment, so it maintains a good support structure and minimizes our cost.
Right. I mean, I could see it being, very important on the front end to be adding these services that help your business and your clients, but it's also not necessarily equally important, but certainly important that you're also tidying up whatever you might be moving away from. Otherwise, you just have a lot of waste, a lot of fluff, a lot of fragments of the business that don't need to be there.
Exactly. Right.
So what do you see as the keys to pulling this stuff off? How do you manage this new stuff? How do you manage the people, the new processes, the keep looking forward, but making sure that we're tidying up the past, but taking care of the present? I mean, that's a daunting task.
Yeah, I think in our case, it starts with our board, our board of directors and our executive team kind of recognizing and being the sponsors for change. And then from that, we turn it into goals. Goals have measurements. So I think that starts kind of like the messaging throughout the organization that we need to change. Why do we need to change? And how dramatically do we need to change? Because we have measurements involved. So I think that's job one, is setting the stage for change and change management. I think down more in the trenches, when I talk about process and the effect on people, one of the keys to us is having some good business analysts. Business analyst is a role. Anyone can play the role of a business analyst. Sometimes we have one of our technical analysts play a business analyst role, or a project manager, or a manager, or even one of our clinicians. But either way, we have to understand that there's an effect on the operation of the business, and we can't just plug in a technology and expect it to work. If we're going to get high efficiency, then we're going to have to people that that really understand the business. And that comes down to someone engaging with one of these projects or technologies, understanding the impact on the operation and the people that use them, and driving the change. And that have someone play that business analyst role. I mentioned getting rid of the old stuff, convincing people that we're not going to do things either two ways or split, and one part of the organization do it the new way and one part doing the old way. We need to gut the old stuff. I think partnerships, I mentioned, is a key. We can't go alone. Just absolutely can't go alone. We don't have even if we had the skill sets, we don't have the staff to do the number of projects that we're doing at any given time. I think in our case, again, I think that we want to be a fast follower. That's one of our keys to success. We want to be a relatively early adopter. We don't want to be way behind the curve, but we don't want to be the early adopter. We don't want to be, out on the bleeding edge. We need to, because of our, again, the resources that we have, the capital and people resources, what we would rather do is be a fast follower and then spend our time and capital around making sure we can implement relatively quickly and stable. And then, like I said, measurements. It's we're looking for some dramatic change, whether we measure our consumer perception and all the enablement tools that we took to them, and is this making life easier for them? We can measure outcomes from a clinical standpoint. We can measure cost. We can measure productivity. And I think tying the measurements to the goals are one of the keys. You have to know where you are.
Yeah, that kind of brings me into, well, if I could just dovetail on the end of that, we always say, as a technology consulting firm, we have to be learning on the bleeding edge, but we don't want to be recommending and implementing and supporting things that are on the bleeding edge, because it ends up being too expensive for our customers, too expensive for us. It typically has a lot of bugs, a lot of kinks. It sets improper expectations, maybe, or certainly bad first impressions. So we're kind of like where you are, a fast follower. We're going to have to lead on the bleeding edge. We're going to have to learn on the bleeding edge, but we're really offering these things when they become more leading edge. That's when we start making the recommendations to clients, so that, like you talked about, you'd rather be close to the front, don't need to be all the way to the front, because that can be painful.
Exactly. You have to be close enough that it becomes a differentiator for you,
Right.
but at the right risk level.